Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Gil Klein. I'm the club's president and a national correspondent with Media General newspapers, writing for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the Tampa Tribune, and the Winston-Salem Journal. I'd like to welcome my fellow club members in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching us on C-SPAN or listening to us on National Public Radio or the Internet Global Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. On Tuesday, January 17th, Irvin S. Duggan, President of the Public Broadcasting Service, will talk about the future and unique strength of public broadcasting. On Tuesday, January 31st, Marvin Runyon, the Postmaster General, will talk about improving the performance of the Post Office and the new 32-cent stamp. And for some reason, that always gets a laugh. I don't. And on Wednesday, February 1st, Sir David Frost, host of Talking with David Frost, will address a press club audience. Audio and videotapes, as well as transcripts of press club lunches, are available by calling 1-800-500-9911. If you have any questions for the speaker, and I trust that you will, please write them on the cards available for you at the tables. Pass them forward, and I will ask as many as time allows. I'd like now to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right is Judy Mathewson of Ottawa News Service. Rick Dunham of Business Week. Andrew Miga of the Boston Herald. Bill Sternberg, Washington Bureau Chief of Thompson Newspapers. Mrs. Beth Kennedy, wife of Representative Joe Kennedy. Dan Rather, anchor and managing editor of CBS Evening News. Vicki Kennedy, the wife of Senator Edward Kennedy. Skipping over our speaker for a moment, we have Mark Johnson of the Media General News Service and chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Representative Joe Kennedy, Democrat of Massachusetts. Joan lOeil of Scripps Howard News Service and the member of the Speakers Committee who organized today's luncheon. Monroe Carmen, editor-at-large of Bloomberg Business News, vice president of the National Press Club, and the incoming president of the club, whose inaugural party, January 21st, is going to be a great deal. I urge you all to sign up now before it's sold out. Godfrey Sperling of the Christian Science Monitor. John Mulligan of the Providence Journal. And Adam Clymer of the New York Times. I'd also like to thank staff members Melissa Bender, Pat Nelson, Melanie Abdow-Dermott, and Jeff Tarbell for organizing today's luncheon. Now today we are pleased to have with us Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts. Last October, just before the congressional elections, we had a debate here at the club between Senator Phil Gramm and Senator Bob Graham. Each senator was making the argument for his party in the waning days of the campaign. We learned at that time that the senators had a bet. Phil Gramm bet Bob Graham that if Senator Kennedy won re-election, he would buy the Florida senator a Texas steak dinner. And Bob Graham bet Phil Gramm that if Kennedy lost, he would buy the Texas senator a Florida stone crab dinner. With a little prodding, I got them to agree to at least invite Senator Kennedy along for the ride. Well, it turned out that Bob Graham won. In the final days of the campaign, a lot of Kennedys in this room. In the final days of the campaign, Ted Kennedy turned on that Kennedy charm and cranked up the Democratic apparatus to prove once again that it's nearly impossible to beat a Kennedy in Massachusetts. But why would the Senators Graham choose to bet on Kennedy? There were plenty of other close Senate races that year. I didn't hear Phil Gramm laying any bets on Ollie North. It is an axiom of American politics that the Kennedy name has been the bête noire of the Republican Party for more than 30 years. Look up the word liberal in the GOP political dictionary, and there's a picture of Ted Kennedy. Their dislike may go back to the fact that Mr. Kennedy was first elected to the Senate in 1962 on the same day that Richard Nixon was defeated for governor of California and promised we wouldn't have him to kick around anymore. Since then, Senator Kennedy has been at the forefront of every liberal cause that the Democratic Party has embraced. But his re-election obviously didn't signal any resurgence of liberal feeling in the American electorate. This is one bet that Senator Phil Gramm may not have lost a lot of sleep over. Now, with the Democratic Party apparently in disarray under Newt Gingrich's juggernaut this week on Capitol Hill, Senator Kennedy is here to expound the basic principles to which he would like to see his party adhere in its time of troubles. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm press club welcome for Senator Edward Kennedy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to thank Gil Klein for that generous introduction, and I'm grateful to the Press Club for the opportunity to address you today. I come here as a Democrat. I reject such qualifiers as New Democrat, or Old Democrat, or Neo-Democrat. I am committed to the enduring principles of the Democratic Party, and I am proud of its great tradition of service to the people who are the heart and strength of this nation, working families and the middle class. I would have lost in Massachusetts if I had done what Democrats who were defeated in other parts of the country too often tried to do. I was behind in mid-September, but I believe I won because I ran for health reform, not away from it. I ran for a minimum wage increase, not against it. I continued to talk about issues like jobs, aid to education, and job training, and I attacked Republican proposals to tilt the tax code to the most privileged of our people. I stood against limiting welfare benefits if a mother has another child, and I will stand against any other harsh proposals that aim at the mother but hit and hurt innocent children. I spoke out for gun control and against reactionary Republican proposals to abandon crime prevention as a weapon in the war on crime. I rejected the Republican double standard that welcomes government as benign when it subsidizes the affluent, but condemns government as the enemy when it helps the poor. I ran as a Democrat in belief as well as name. This turned out to be not only right in principle, it was also the best politics. I talked about the issues that mattered to working families and about what I had tried to do to address their needs and concerns. And I take some sense of pride and satisfaction that exit polling showed 89% of Massachusetts voters, by far the highest percentage in the country, said they had learned enough about the candidates and the issues in the Senate race to make an informed choice. Our issues, if we defend them, are popular. The working families in New Bedford, Fall River, Lowell, Lawrence, Springfield, and Worcester in my state voted for me, and they have the same concerns as working families throughout the country. The caricatures of us by the other side will be ineffective as long as we vigorously oppose them and expose them, instead of sheepishly acquiescing in them. If Democrats run for cover, if we become pale carbon copies of the opposition and try to act like Republicans, we will lose and deserve to lose. As I have said on other occasions, Democrats must be more than warmed-over Republicans. The last thing this country needs is two Republican parties. If we fall for our opponents' tactics, if we listen to those who tell us to abandon health reform or slash student loans and children's programs, or engage in a bidding war to see who can be the most anti-government or the most laissez-faire, we will have only ourselves to blame. As Democrats, we can win, but only if we stand for something. The election last November was not a ratification of Republican solutions. By the narrowest of margins, they gained control of Congress. But less than 40% of eligible voters turned out on Election Day, and only slightly more than half of those, about 20%, cast ballots for Republicans. Some mandate. As the current controversy over the motor voter law demonstrates, Republicans thrive by depressing voter turnout. Intensity matters for Democrats. Turnout will certainly be higher in 1996, 50 or 60% higher. We must stand our democratic ground. We must fight for the ideals that are the very reason for our party's being. We must prove to working families and average citizens that we are on their side, fighting hard for them. If we do, then Democrats will turn out, come home in 1996, and the defeat of 1994 will be history, and we will be back stronger than ever. Not stale from the past, but renewed for the future. But to achieve that victory, we must not repeat the mistakes of the past. We must make explicit to the American people our core values and beliefs, which form the basis of our political philosophy and underlie our legislative proposals. Specifically, and most important, that we as Americans, with all of our diversity, share a common purpose, a common sense of family, of neighborhood, community and country, of fairness, responsibility, and decency. Unfortunately, we have failed in the past to make these vital and important points as clearly as we should. We Democrats have always considered family, community, faith, love of country to be core values, the foundation upon which all of our proposals are based. But we allowed Republicans to take these values as their own. We assumed too quickly that our commitment to such values was self-evident in the proposals we made and the legislation we passed. We were wrong, and we paid a price because of it. So let me set the record straight. Family, country, love of country, fairness, responsibility, community, all of these values underlie the philosophy of the Democratic Party. And these are the values that underlie and must underlie all of our legislative proposals. This is not to say, however, that I believe these core values should be used as a superficial rationale for bumper sticker solutions to the complex problems that we face. No, these core values require us to reject simple, easy answers which may make us feel good today, but do absolutely nothing to solve these problems. Our values oblige us to address these problems in a thoughtful and productive way. We are, without apology, the party that believes in assisting the poor and the disabled and the disadvantaged, but not to the detriment of the working class, which is justifiably frustrated and angry. They feel left out and left behind because they know they are losing ground. They see the wealthiest Americans becoming wealthier. They see the poorest Americans being taken care of by society's safety net, which their tax dollars have put in place. Americans are angry, and rightly so. Rapid economic change and surging global competition have made many jobs and people less secure. The majority of Americans are working harder and making less. Yet fair reward for work has always been essential to their hope of creating better lives for their families and their children. As Democrats, we must address that anger and frustration. But the answer is not to create larger problems by dismantling the safety net, leaving the poor to fend for themselves, Such a result is not only inhumane, it is wrong and destructive to our country and communities and our values. Nor is the solution to give more tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans in the hope that something will trickle down to the middle class. This country was founded on equal opportunity for all, not unequal opportunity for some. Instead, we must be more responsive and give a greater helping hand to working families and the middle class. In this central battle for their minds and hearts, heritage and history are on our side. Recall the great victorious battles of the past for Social Security and Medicare, for the minimum wage and the rights of workers, for civil rights, equal rights, for protection of the environment, for a head start for every child, and the education of all children, regardless of their parents' income, for family and medical leave, for opportunity for women and a woman's right to choose. By any standard, these were extraordinary achievements, and all of them were won because they were sought and fought for by the members of the Democratic Party. And let us not forget that many of these measures, which the American people now accept as part of our way of life, were opposed at the time by the majority of Republicans in Congress. Democrats bled and suffered lasting battle scars for these victories. But there are few, if any, Republicans who would refight them or repeal them now. These historic victories strengthen families, strengthen communities, and brought Americans together. They reflect the fundamental dedication of the Democratic Party to a sense of progress that embraces all Americans. Our achievement reminds us of our roots, inspire us to fight harder now, and give us a credibility and a vision that history denies Republicans in fighting for the future. Surely the challenges we face in the 1990s are no greater than those we faced in other years. People want government to be more responsive to their problems, more effective in resolving them. I'm talking about basic things that make a difference in people's lives. A strong, growing economy, a clear commitment to keep the current recovery going, and to keep the deficit heading down. Good jobs and decent wages where hard work pays off, and rising standards of living, not falling farther behind. Safe streets and neighborhoods, schools that give students a good education, child care and health care that are accessible and affordable to all, rekindling the sense of community and patriotism, of shared values and individual responsibility, of service to others, to neighborhoods, and to the nation alike. These ideals have always been, and must continue to be, our Democratic priorities. And we made more progress on them in the last 2 years than most voters ever knew on Election Day. But there is no profit in endlessly regretting the denial of credit to President Clinton and the Democratic Party for a remarkable record of achievement. One reason for the lack of credit is that the President and the Democratic Congress took on an almost unprecedented array of tough challenges and did not win every battle. Another reason is that we live in a period of vast economic and social transformation in which the politics of fear is easily marshaled to overrun the politics of hope. And another reason I am convinced is a Republican strategy of obstruction, distortion, and massive personal attack on the President and the First Lady. In the wake of this election, Democrats need to fight back for our beliefs, not turn our back on the Clinton administration. Blaming Bill Clinton by some in our party comes with ill grace from those who abandoned him on critical votes in the last Congress, then ran from him in the campaign, and then lost, often by wide margins, and now they come forward to advocate a strategy discredited by their own defeats. My fundamental recommendation to the President is that he stay the course of change and do what he thinks is right. My advice to my fellow Democrats is that we work with the President for change instead of seeking to change our principles or distance ourselves from him. No one wants a repeat of the Republic tactic in 1994 that made the G and GOP stand for gridlock. We must try to reach across party lines, build bipartisan coalitions to do the things the nation needs and deserves. This is an obligation on both sides, Republicans as well as Democrats. We must never forget that it takes two parties to be bipartisan. I believe in free enterprise, but I believe in active government too. A practical way to blend them both and make government more effective is through what I have called public enterprise, using market forces wherever possible, not asking taxpayers to blindly pay for programs, but insisting that programs be genuine investment in a brighter future and produce results commensurate with their cost. There is no doubt that many programs are not successful. A federal program is not the solution to every problem, but there continues to be an important federal role in solving the problems of our society by investing in people and the infrastructure needed for our country to succeed and our citizens to thrive. To believe otherwise is hostile to the basic values of our country and to the historic concept of we the people in our Constitution. We must not rob the people of the resource of government. It is their government, and we must make it work for them. We do need to streamline government and make it more responsive to average Americans. But as President Clinton said last month, people want government to be lean, not mean. There is a large difference between reinventing government and rejecting it, and an even larger difference between using government to promote the general welfare and misusing it to pander to the powerful and punish the powerless. If we keep these truths in mind, we can find real solutions that work for health care, schools, and jobs and achieve a rising standard of living for all. We can deal effectively with crime and welfare and race and immigration instead of allowing our opponents to keep on welding grievances, anger, suspicion, and even outright bigotry into weapons of mass destruction for their next political campaigns. Democrats can win the current debate on the budget and on tax relief for the middle class. Republicans can disguise their intentions all they want. But at the heart of the Republican plan are deep reductions in Medicare and Medicaid and lavish tax cuts that favor the wealthy, especially their capital gains tax cut, the classic Republican tax break for the rich. Trickle-down economics at its worst. That is not what the 1994 elections were about, and the Republicans and the voters know it. We must also resist our opponents' mindless anti-government vendetta against regulation, a rhetoric leading to an across-the-board assault on government that hides a multitude of injustices and indifferences. Republicans wanted to get the government out of the savings and loan industry in the worst way in the 1980s, and they did. Deregulation ran amok. The S&L mess became one of the most serious scandals in our history, costing taxpayers more than $150 billion. So my advice to Republicans is to make sure there's water in the pool before they leap off their pro-business, anti-regulation diving board. Government is there for a reason, to help people, including the middle class. There are mounting needs and frustrations in this land, but it will only make things worse, not better, to shred the safety net or deregulate health and safety. Nostalgia for a past that never was is not a policy for the future. Where do we go from here? Let me outline some key priorities that should be part of our Democratic agenda for 1995, because they are part of our strategy to strengthen and invest in the community we call America. No issue better represents the commitment of the Democratic Party to strengthen families and communities than the drive for comprehensive health reform. It is a total misreading. It is a total misreading of the election and a deliberate misreading of the public will to conclude this issue is no longer important or urgent. For some in Congress, with their blue chip coverage under the federal government plan, health reform may be only a political game where points are won or lost. But to the majority of Americans, it's a continuing, worsening problem where their health, their children, and their family, their financial security, and often their very lives are at stake. The real value of the average working family paycheck has been stagnant for many years, but the share that goes for health has soared. Excessive inflation in health costs means less and less of the paycheck available for everything else. Millions of working men and women risk losing their insurance they have if they change or lose their job. And for too many senior citizens and persons with disabilities, the high cost of prescription drugs and long-term care has broken the promise of Social Security and Medicare. Democrats fought for health reform in the last Congress, but we did not fight well. We made serious mistakes that contributed to our failure. But I am certain that in large part we were defeated because of the cynical Republican calculation that successful health reform would benefit Democrats at the polls and thwart Republican election goals. And so they settled on a strategy of relentless obstruction. No one can know for sure, but I believe voters would have rallied to Democrats in 1994 if we had gone down fighting as hard as we could for health reform. Instead, we engaged in a search for a phantom compromise that our opponents never intended to achieve, and we allowed the great debate in Congress to end without a vote, with a whimper, not a bang, and we must not make that mistake again. Now Republicans have had their election and their victory. I ask them and challenge them to join in fashioning a health bill and enacting it into law in 1995. Sit down with us for real. Get serious about coming to agreement. Bring Harry and Louise if you like, but let's expose special interest pleading for what it is. Shape a compromise that deals realistically with the problem, rather than treating each offer of a compromise as a pretext for new demands, which is what happened last year. It would be nice if Republican contract with America contained even a hint of this simple pledge: to give every American the same health care that newly elected signers of the contracts are receiving from the federal government. We are now making Congress abide by the same laws we pass for others. Why not give the American people the benefit of the same laws that Congress passes for itself? A second major challenge, if we are serious about revitalizing our communities and investing in families and the nation's future, is reform in job education. Today we have scores of separate job training programs costing billions of dollars a year, and workers are not getting their money's worth. President Clinton and the Democratic Leadership Council are right to call for vouchers and greater reliance on market forces so that workers can circumvent the bureaucracy in choosing the training that they want. We must also focus more on outcomes. Too often the path of least resistance has been to create more and more training programs without the follow-through to see that they succeed in actually preparing people for jobs and placing them in jobs. And we must reward those that are successful and defund those that fall short. We must do more to redress the widening gap between soaring profits and stagnant wages. We must insist that firms provide training for their workers. I make no apology for supporting a mandate in an area like this. Often a mandate is the only practical way to assure that free enterprise is fair as well as free. Through the minimum wage, we ask business to invest in the lowest paid workers. And the time has come to ask business to invest in all workers by providing minimal level of training. Companies make choices. Some firms train their workers well, upgrade their skills, offer good benefits. They treat workers as valuable resources and still earn good profits. Other companies rely on a harsher strategy that exploit workers. They downsize. They lay off good workers. They hire part-time employees to avoid paying benefits, and they cut corners on safety. Congress should do more, not less, to encourage companies to do the right thing and prevent unfair competition from those that don't. Mandates make sense in areas like job training and health care. We must break the iron grip of Gresham's law of business, in which irresponsible firms drive out firms attempting to be responsible. A third major challenge to invest in our future and strengthen our American community relates to education. With college costs rising, over $8,000 a year at many public universities, over $20,000 at many private colleges, the American dream is too often an impossible dream for many families. Let's hold the line against even 1 cent of Republican cuts in college aid. How dare anyone offer a contract with America that professes allegiance to the middle class, but that would slam college doors in the face of their children? Basic values are at stake. Let's strengthen the Department of Education, not abolish it. Let's oppose and defeat education cuts that would be nothing more than federal aid for ignorance. Finally, a top priority for this Congress is reform of the lobbying and campaign finance laws. No change will do more to strengthen our American community and make greater progress possible on every other issue than breaking the stranglehold of special interest groups and restoring government that truly represents we the people. We must end the power of special interest money in political action committees and take elections off the auction block. We must make lobbyists disclose what they are doing in the back rooms to subvert the public interest. It is time to end the lavish gifts, the meals and entertainment and expensive trips paid for by special interests. A sunshine law for lobbyists will pay a dividend to you and the press as well, because it will enable you to expose what really happens in the ongoing battles between the special interest and the public interest. These are major items on a Democratic agenda for recovery in 1995. But in a larger sense, they are at the heart of a constructive and needed American agenda to restore the sense of family, community, of caring for one another, of building a brighter future that will once again reflect this nation at its best. In all this, we must understand that sometimes the task of a great political party is to face the tide, not just ride with it, and to turn it again in the direction of our deepest convictions. We will lose our way and our elections if we abandon our principles and drift with the shifting politics of the moment. Let's renew our cause as Democrats. Let's hold our standard high and advance it proudly. Let's be who we are and not pretend to be something else, and if we do, we will have a strong and winning case to take to the American people in this new Congress and in all the years ahead. The Republican majority will be a transient one, and Democrats will be proud to be Democrats again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. We have a lot of questions here, so we'll get right to it. First one is, in your remarks, you castigated Democrats who now attempt to match Republicans' call for changes. Are you also critical of President Clinton's agreement with Republicans' call for a middle-class tax cut?
Absolutely not. The differences which exist today within the Democratic Party, and there's some differences, pale in contrast the differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. I support the middle-class tax cut. If you look at it, it's about $25 billion for education for middle-class families. It's been the middle class that have lost out over the period of the last 2 to 3 or the last 15 years, basically under the trickle-down economic theory that has really bankrupted this country with some $5 trillion in deficit. The interesting fact is, if we, under the current budget item, if we didn't have to repay the interest on the debt accumulated by the Republicans, the budget would be in balance today. And I think giving working families help and assistance, a very modest step in terms of a middle-class tax cut makes sense, and the emphasis in terms of education and children is right where it ought to be.
This questioner says, with Mr. Clinton clearly moving to the right in his effort to shore up his political base, doesn't he risk a challenge from the left in next year's presidential primaries from someone like you or Jesse Jackson?
No. The answer is no.
You're also speaking for Jesse Jackson.
I never speak for Jesse or my nephew Joe.
You heard it first here, ladies and gentlemen. What do you feel about House Minority Leader Gephardt's flat tax proposal? Don't you think that the American people are finally ready for this type of tax simplification?
My understanding of Gephardt's proposal was to try and bring the rates down and eliminate the inequities in the internal revenue system. That was really at the heart of the '86 Act, to try and make it progressive but also move towards different rates. That's my interpretation of it, and I think that that makes a good deal of sense. The basic concept of the Kemp flat tax I'm opposed to, but that isn't the way I read the Gephardt proposal. What he was talking about is moving towards the continued debate on rate levels, but also eliminating the inequities that exist even in the current code from the reforms of 1986.
Do you approve of the direction the administration is heading on welfare reform?
Yes. There is no question that there has to be reform, and there should be reform. Any able-bodied person that can work should work. We have to recognize that the benefits that go to welfare recipients are basically the taxes that are paid in by working families, and any family that can do it should do it. What I have been opposed to is the suggestions, recommendations, or programs that have been targeted primarily on women and also on children. I think a good deal more could be done about deadbeat dads, for example, and collecting court decisions in terms of providing for children. But the basic concept in terms of reform is one generally that I'm in support of.
This questioner says, if Republicans are successful in passing the balanced budget amendment, require tax increases to be passed by 60% of the vote, enact 6-year term limits, will they not have succeeded in institutionalizing their goal of small government that will be impossible to reverse?
That won't happen. That just isn't going to happen. I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee. We had our first hearings this past week, the first tentative markup yesterday. I'd like to find out, we're going to find out, how many of our Republican friends will permit a president to effectively freeze or take off the table or rescind any funding. Are they going to give that to any president of the United States? Number one, I want to hear the votes on that in the Senate. Secondly, are they going to give it to the courts to be able to strike down any spending? Are they going to give the courts the power to increase taxes? I want to give that vote to the United States Senate. And then thirdly, if they come back to the Congress, then you got circuitous reasoning. They'll say, we're not going to give it to the president to freeze it. We won't give it to the judiciary. We'll keep it ourselves, and why do we need it? I'm going to be interested if we have a capital budget, which has been talked about in our... why shouldn't we include education if we're looking about buildings? Why aren't we talking about investments in people that are going to really make a difference in terms of their future and the future of our country? We're going to exclude education in those programs, as well as immunization programs. We want to have a chance to get into this issue. It'll be the most important vote that I cast in the United States Senate this year will be in the balanced budget debate. It'll be the most important measure that we debate in the Senate of the United States. And I believe that even though the votes would be there today, I do not expect it myself that it'll pass in the Senate.
This question says, congressional elections almost always were decided by small turnouts. Why do Democrats throw that up as a reason why they lost in 1994?
Well, they turned out all right in Massachusetts. That was it's part of the reason. We had 25 to 30% more in Massachusetts. And it made a difference. This is part of the reason. You know, I am just amazed at all of our friends who talk about what happened with the Republicans, where they got a fraction of a percent in terms of the vote. They didn't get in '94 what they got more votes in '92 than they got in '94. But now they got in '94, and you have the 40%. They get about 20% of the vote. Think of the criticism they had for Bill Clinton when he only got 43%. You remember this city was alive saying he only got 43%. That wasn't really a mandate, and now we're giving him a mandate with 20%? Just doesn't measure up. Just doesn't measure up in my book. I think what you do find is you will see a very important expansion, and I would expect it to be anywhere from 40 to 60% more in 1996. Those ought to be Democratic votes. They will be Democratic votes if Democrats go back to being Democrats. But they won't be. They won't come out, and they won't be if we try and be another Republican Party. And it just seems to me that that ought to be something that we can understand as a party and also understand as candidates.
How do you respond to charges from the Republicans that the Great Society programs not only failed, but were counterproductive?
Well, you know, I asked frequently about Great Society or New Deal programs. Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy understood a very important principle, and that is the economy is the driving force in this country. And the most important social program, this was Franklin Roosevelt and John Kennedy that said it was a social program. I'm glad to see some of our Republicans pick it up. We believe it. But it was the Democrats that understood the importance of having employment, important of having jobs, and the expansion of jobs, good jobs, well paid. They understood it. It was Harry Truman, who was the principal architect of American foreign policy. I have been supportive of that foreign policy program. It was Lyndon Johnson that broke down the barriers of discrimination. We started on race. We've done religion, ethnicity. We eliminated national origin quota system in Asian Pacific Triangle. We made progress with women and disability. All of that started under the Democrats. I'm a liberal in that tradition. I'm a liberal in the tradition of John Kennedy that thought that service and Peace Corps to community was important in this case. And I am a Democrat in the tradition of Jimmy Carter that placed human rights. Those are part of our traditions, and I'm proud of every one of them. And if Democrats get back to defending those, of course we can have difference in particular programs. But those are the enduring values that have guided us. At other times, they ought to be the enduring values that guide us now. And if we get back to that, those issues, we can coordinate and consolidate. I yield to no one in terms of coordinating, consolidating different programs. We've been doing it, and we'll do it more. I'd like to do it in health care.
This questioner says, you seem to be blaming GOP moderates who offered the phantom health care reform compromises last year. Can you be more explicit? Do you place responsibility for the failure at the door of Chafee, Durenberger et al.? What about their Democratic partners, Kerry, Conrad, and others?
Well, I think no, not specifically on the group that you've mentioned there. I think there's room for enough criticism in the last year, although I must say that I think Mrs. Clinton has been willing to take more than her fair share. You know, it's extraordinary to have a President of the United States, and Mrs. Clinton could have taken on immunizing children. Every family in this country would have been grateful to her. Took on a tough problem. Took on a tough problem. But he talks about it now, and it's easy. When it's not successful, it would have been easy. It would have been done a long time before on that. And sure, we should have gotten the legislation up a little earlier. And sure, we should have anticipated the whole range of different opposition to it, and should have anticipated that earlier. Sure, we should have been able to do it. Sure, some of the groups held out a little too long to make sure that their programs were included. And sure, it was complex and difficult to be able to do, basically as a point of accommodation to a lot of the various groups. That was the effort to do it. to try and deal and make sure that the small business, we're going to exclude them at 10. Let's put it up to 20. Sure, we could have done all of those kinds of things, and everybody can go around and vary this. But make no mistake about it, that when Bob Packwood, the ranking Republican member, the Finance Committee said, we killed it. Let's just hope our fingerprints aren't caught about it. You didn't have to be a member of the United States Senate to understand what he was saying. That decision was made in the fall of 1993, that we're not going to have a health care bill, and it was basic and fundamental to all of their views about how they were going to come to the '94 election. And that was out there, and what you found is the retreat and retreat and retreat. I have high regard for the seriousness and the commitment of those that you have mentioned, and I think part of the responsibility goes with me and with others for not trying to catch up and hook up probably with the mainstream group earlier, the final proposal that they had with some modifications. And I think those modifications could have been worked out at the very end, I think was the basis really for important movement, which I think with some changes certainly I could have supported. I know some of my colleagues couldn't have. So I think there's enough in there to go along, but I think one of the 2 or 3 strongest reasons was the absolute commitment to not permit a meaningful legislative effort to go forward.
Last year, the Democrats were saying that any partial passage of health care would ruin the system. They wanted the whole thing. Now, Dick Gephardt is saying we have to start small. Let's see what we can pass. Do you think there's going to be something come through health care this year, and will it be beneficial to the system? Yeah.
I've been a co-sponsor of 11 different bills. CEO Bob Ball here, who's been an architect of, I always come back to Bob and Tom and the other friends that just say, look, well, that isn't going to go. Have you got another way that we can do it? I don't mind what the form or the shape, whatever it is, as long as we're going to get to, the universal coverage in a way that's going to get a handle on the cost and emphasize the preventive care aspects of it. It has a long-term component and does something about prescription drugs. And there's other obvious features that ought to be included in it, but we ought to, and that has a shared responsibility. I mean, I think no matter how many times you look at it, it still comes down to very small number of ways that you can really do that proposal. But I would hope that we could do something. I would hope we will have an opportunity to do so in this Congress. I talked with my colleagues and also to some Republicans about it, and we're going to make a serious effort to do something. It's obviously too early now to know what that would be, but for me, I'm hopeful that that will be the down payment and we'll finish the job after '96.
2 questions on public broadcasting. The first one is funding for public broadcasting and public radio basically gone, or can Democrats save it? Number 2 says, Newt Gingrich thinks you and Senator Rockefeller should personally pay for the corporation for public broadcasting. Do the 2 of you have deep enough pockets for PBS video and radio?
Yeah. I'll let Jay, I think he can do that one. I would hope that we could, we had, and most people here would remember the votes that we had last year where there was still strong support for public broadcasting and for both the television and the radio. I'm a strong supporter of it. I always find that it's kind of interesting. Some of our friends say, well, it's a Democratic-leaning organization. They get Bill Buckley. If you look over the programs, they have more conservative commentators and programming than I think others, but I don't find that to be the compelling factor. I think all you have to do is look at the difference that it's making in so many small communities in the South and the West, all over the nation, including communities in rural communities in my part of the world in the Northeast. I think one of the things that has been is being developed, and things that have upset people so much, is that there has been, for example, some programs, like Barney is the classic example of it, that has come on early in terms of either the radio or the television and been a great success and then franchised. And those people who've been involved in it have made about $1 billion, and it's got to sort of start in terms of public broadcasting. I think that that's been true with the arts and to less extent the humanities, but to some extent. The humanities now have trying to work out a process whether they can be returned for different kinds of arrangements that are being made and where grants are made. And I think that that is reasonable. I think American public would support it, so that if there are going to be programs that are going to come through and they do have any commercial, that at least this is going to help to offset some of the taxpayers' monies that go through that. And I think that that's a very reasonable way. We have to sort of work that out. I know that Jane Alexander and the whole board have been working on it. The corporation now has, public broadcasting has instigated a program in that way, relatively new, but it looks very, very hopeful. And I think if we get into some of these kinds of areas where it looks like if there are successes, that there's going to be some contribution on it, I think people will feel that it's a very good investment. I don't think that there's should be any question that the standards that have been set in public broadcasting have had an important positive impact on the on radio and television, although I ought to yield that question to Mr. Rather over here to see what he thought about it.
Why are Democrats so far behind on communications technology? Republicans have built an enormous network of conservative cable, talk shows, think tanks, etc., to get their message out.
Well, I think that that's, I think generally we are behind, and we have to catch up. I take a little pride that I'm on internet, and one of the, I have to mention my Chris Casey, who's in my office, is just a wonderful person who has just been completely creative and imaginative, and I'm very pleased that Mr. Gingrich has seen to support those kinds of efforts for the greatest kinds of communication and utilizing it. Generally, you know, the talk shows are something else, but we've been behind the curve on it, the Democrats have. I think at some time it's useful for us, and I've started in politics, the written word was really the word, some television, and certainly was important. And President Kennedy made it enormously important as an instrument for communication as the presidency, but still it was the written word. And I think for most of us who learned through either reading and there is sort of a sense of communication that one develops, I think there's a different kind of communication, the way people get information today. And we're about the last ones to know about it. I mean, it's sort of talk shows, it's the afternoon programs, it's other kinds of information systems that are out there. And I think politicians generally come back year after year and still deal with the old sort of ways of doing it. And I think we all have to get up to speed more about how people are getting information, what kind of information are you getting, how this impacts them, if we're going to try to gain their support, and also to try and convince them that what we are attempting to do is really in their interest. And there's a big gap there, and I think Mr. Gingrich has served an important and constructive purpose in trying to open up the system as far as communications go.
This questioner says the Republicans, as well as HUD Secretary Cisneros, are now advocating vouchers for the poor instead of building more public housing. Do you think that the housing stock will be there for them to take advantage of these vouchers?
Joe's on the committee and says it's not a very good idea. I don't know enough about it. I really don't. I'll be glad to find out, let whoever asks the question know about it, but I don't know enough.
You have been a strong influence in bringing peace to troubles in Ireland. Will it continue? Will Ireland be one nation again? How soon?
Well, is that the last question? No, they said trying to keep your answers short around here. We can go on for a little while. Joe will correct me on that part. I think, first of all, the opportunities for moving away from violence have never been better in Northern Ireland. And I think it's a great tribute to Mr. Adams and to John Hume, and also to Prime Minister Mages and Albert Reynolds for doing so. And I think it's a great tribute as well to President Clinton at a very important time, saw the importance of indicating American interest. Obviously, there are two very important traditions in the North that have different histories and different backgrounds and experiences, and both of those traditions have to be respected. I think the awareness of the United States and its support for the forces for peace wherever they are, and they're obviously scattered in different sources in the North and outside of the North, have been something which the administration, I think, deserves a real credit for. And I'm convinced that as long as I think there's a timeliness, as I think most of us would understand, on the efforts for peace. The moment we can't think of business as usual. I think there are those perhaps that are part of the process, and I think most about the British government that perhaps should recognize the importance of moving and take advantage of this time, because it's very real. I mean, no one could have predicted what had happened to Albert Reynolds, and he was a key factor and force in terms of moving this process. We can't think of peace as a business as usual. The opportunity is there, and all of us have to use the best efforts to see that it's grasped. And I think it's one of the very important, South Africa, the Middle East, and Northern Ireland, I think, are three very difficult and complex and extraordinary possible situations, but there's a hopeful light, and I think that all of us take some satisfaction about the direction that it's moving in.
Okay, we are unfortunately out of time. However, I of course would like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for appearing here, which I'm sure you'll frame and put up in your living room. And also a National Press Club mug. Now the question, of course, is have you had your dinner yet with the Senators Graham? Each of them have one of these mugs, and I hope you will take yours, and you can all toast each other with one of these mugs. And the last question is, would you whisper a secret in Dan Mather's ear?
In Vicky's ear? I'll do something even, I'll say do something even nicer, and that's introduce my daughter, Cara, and her daughter, my grandchild, Grace, who's here, and her husband, Michael. That's the real reason I got reelected, right back there in that cradle. Thank you very, very much. Enjoyed being with all of you. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you'll be back next week for Mr. Duggan.
Joseph, thanks.
Very nice to meet you. Take care of yourself.
What was I going to...
I'd also like to thank staff members Melissa Bender, Pat Nelson, Melanie Abdow-Dermott, and Jeff Tarbell for organizing today's luncheon. Now today we are pleased to have with us Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts. Last October, just before the congressional elections, we had a debate here at the club between Senator Phil Gramm and Senator Bob Graham. Each senator was making the argument for his party in the waning days of the campaign. We learned at that time that the senators had a bet. Phil Gramm bet Bob Graham that if Senator Kennedy won re-election, he would buy the Florida senator a Texas steak dinner. And Bob Graham bet Phil Gramm that if Kennedy lost, he would buy the Texas senator a Florida stone crab dinner. With a little prodding, I got them to agree to at least invite Senator Kennedy along for the ride. Well, it turned out that Bob Graham won. In the final days of the campaign, Vicki Kennedy, the wife of Senator Edward Kennedy, skipping over our speaker for a moment, we have Mark Johnson of the Media General News Service and chairman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Representative Joe Kennedy, Democrat of Massachusetts. Joan lOeil of Scripps Howard News Service and the member of the Speakers Committee who organized today's luncheon. Monroe Carmen, editor-at-large of Bloomberg Business News Vice President of the National Press Club, and the incoming President of the club, whose inaugural party, January 21st, is going to be a great deal. I urge you all to sign up now before it's sold out. Godfrey Sperling of the Christian Science Monitor. John Mulligan of the Providence Journal. And Adam Clymer of the New York Times. Good afternoon. Welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Gil Klein. I'm the club's president and a national correspondent with Media General newspapers, writing for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the Tampa Tribune, and the Winston-Salem Journal. I'd like to welcome my fellow club members in the audience today, as well as those of you who are watching us on C-SPAN or listening to us on National Public Radio or the Internet Global Computer Network. Before introducing our head table, I would like to remind our members of some upcoming speakers. On Tuesday, January 17th, Irvin S. Duggan, President of the Public Broadcasting Service, will talk about the future and unique strength of public broadcasting. On Tuesday, January 31st, Marvin Runyon, the Postmaster General, will talk about improving the performance of the Post Office and the new 32-cent stamp. A lot of Kennedys in this room. In the final days of the campaign, Ted Kennedy turned on that Kennedy charm and cranked up the Democratic apparatus to prove once again that it's nearly impossible to beat a Kennedy in Massachusetts. But why would the Senators Graham choose to bet on Kennedy? There were plenty of other close Senate races that year. I didn't hear Phil Gramm laying any bets on Ollie North. It is an axiom of American politics that the Kennedy name has been the bête noire of the Republican Party for more than 30 years. Look up the word liberal in the GOP political dictionary, and there's a picture of Ted Kennedy. Their dislike may go back to the fact that Mr. Kennedy was first elected to the Senate in 1962 on the same day that Richard Nixon was defeated for governor of California and promised we wouldn't have him to kick around anymore. Since then, Senator Kennedy has been at the forefront of every liberal cause that the Democratic Party has embraced. And for some reason, that always gets a laugh. And on Wednesday, February 1st, Sir David Frost, host of Talking with David Frost, will address a press club audience. Audio and videotapes, as well as transcripts of press club lunches, are available by calling 1-800-500-9911. If you have any questions for the speaker, and I trust that you will, please write them on the cards available for you at the tables, pass them forward, and I will ask as many as time allows. I'd like now to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right is Judy Mathewson of Ottawa News Service. Rick Dunham of Business Week. Andrew Miga of the Boston Herald. Bill Sternberg, Washington Bureau Chief of Thompson Newspapers. Mrs. Beth Kennedy, wife of Representative Joe Kennedy. Dan Rather, anchor and managing editor of CBS Evening News.